Hi, I'm Andrew Musick.
Hi, my name is Sophia Yang.
I'm Selim Taylor. This is our project for ACC200.
Yes, and hi, Mr. Vice President. We looked at two different methods of calculating the overhead for our two products. The direct labor method would have been more appropriate for applying our overhead if the dominant cost driver was direct labor hours. If that were the case, this method would have been more logical and practical. Applying the ABC method is more expensive and time-consuming, but it is the most proper method to apply for your product in this case. Activity-based costing is a system of allocating overhead cost that assumes activities, not volume of production, cause overhead costs to be incurred.
And when factoring in the cost of the 6 activity centers when applying manufacturing overhead, we find that overhead for product X is much higher than originally expected, and that product X overhead is actually lower than product Y overhead is actually lower than outlined by direct labor method. Batch level costs such as machine setups have a higher influence on the overhead in product X, and we will now show you our figures to better illustrate the discrepancy in the numbers and why this is happening.
Thank you. Alright, so let me focus on this. Here we go. Okay, when we're looking at analyzing overhead with a direct labor method, look at product X and Y. So the direct materials and direct labor is going to be the same whether you apply it to direct labor or the ABC method, which is 25 and 30 for product X, 17.24 for product Y. For figuring out the overhead applied, we have to look at the estimated overhead cost by the total number of labor hours. So we're put with $16 per direct labor hour, and you get the overhead by doing $16 times 5 in this instance, which is what it would take to make 1 unit of product X, and you get 64 on this end by doing 16 times 4, which is 4 hours that would take to make 1 unit of product Y. So we see that our numbers is 135 for product X and 105 for product Y. When we're applying the ABC method for product X and Y, direct labors and material are still the same, but when we look at the overhead applied, the numbers are much different than the direct labor method, and we see that product X is actually a lot higher than it was in the direct labor method, $158 compared to $80. And we get this by, where are we? Let's see. By looking at the costs of the activities centers and comparing them to each other. By dividing the estimated overhead cost by the total expected activity, we get a number of direct labor hours set up. So we get that unit, that cost per unit, and you multiply these numbers right here by the labor related to each activity, which is how we get these numbers here, 316,000 and 483,500. So we divide this number here by 2,000, which is the units for product X, and we get this number here, and then we divided the other number by 10,000, and we get this digit here. So it shows us that the overhead is actually $213.25 for product X and $89.35 for product Y. So after going through these figures, The question we ask ourselves is, how do these activities force costs to accumulate? After analyzing the figures, a recommended action is to look at the overhead costs of machine setups and product testing for product X, which are driving the cost up in relation to the amount of units produced for that product. Yeah. Thank you.